Mr. Pranav Adani, Mr. Karan Adani, Shishi Priyadarshini, very distinguished senior colleagues of mine, the ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. I'm truly delighted to be here, and let me first compliment the Chintan Research Foundation on completing its 1 year and on its annual day. And let me compliment the team for being a very vibrant, dynamic, young team. And that I've been through some of the research papers that have been published by the foundation. And I must compliment the Chintan Research Foundation for very detailed, evidence-based research, for very data-driven work, and I particularly have found them extremely intellectually satisfying. And I think in the years to come, the Chintan Research Foundation will emerge as one of India's finest think tanks and will greatly assist and support all of us from government and the private sector to drive growth of India. Ladies and gentlemen, India is today a $4 trillion economy. The challenge is to become, as the Prime Minister has laid out, to be a $30+ trillion economy by 2047. This means that the GDP must grow over 9 times. The per capita income must grow about 8 times. The manufacturing sector must grow about 16 times during this period. And this would also mean that the country will have to grow at rates of 9 to 10% per annum, year after year, for 3 decades or more to be able to lift a very young population. Very few countries in the world have been able to do this, actually. It was done by Japan post-World War II. It was done by Korea later. And in recent times, it's been done by China, which set a scorching pace of growth for over 3 decades. I'm confident that this can be done by India because if you look at it in the last decade, India was a fragile 5 country. It's moved towards one of the top 5 countries of the world, and it's been able to do it because it's carried out very massive structural reforms in its economy. The GST, which replaced 28 taxes, cesses, brought in IBC, it brought in RERA, it brought in ease of doing business, it brought in lowering the corporate tax rates, many structural reforms. It also pushed the limits of being a digital economy. 1.4 billion people in India have a digital identity. But more than that, today we transact over 50% of the payments, real-time fast payments in the world, because we've been able to integrate both the mobile number and the digital identity with a bank account. And everybody from a rural area to a women worker in Tier 2, Tier 3 cities, etc., all do transactions on mobile. And then you had a series of young startups, Mobi, Quakelib, Pine Lab, etc., who started providing credit on the basis of digital history. And then you had another set of young startups like Zerodha, Grow Up Stock, which took stock market and wealth creation to Tier 3 cities. And then you had another set of young startups like GoDigit and Agro, who started providing insurance on the go, on the mobile, within 30 seconds to 1 minute. No other country in the world has been able to do this, what we do. And it's an open source, open API, globally interoperable model. And that is why the Bank of International Settlement said that India achieved in 7 years what it would have taken 50 years to achieve. That was the technological leapfrogging of India in many ways. And therefore, India built a very different alternative model from what the Western world had seen. The Western world technological innovation in the last 3 decades was driven by Amazon, it was driven by Google, it was driven by Meta, but these were all proprietary closed models. And so was it in China with Tencent and Alibaba. But India built an alternative to that with a digital public infrastructure layer and allowing private sector to compete and innovate on top of that. So India is the only country where PhonePe competes with Google Pay and Paytm competes with Amazon Pay on top. And therefore, India demonstrated its great ability to pole vault in many ways. The third thing that's happened in India is that in the last decade, we built a huge amount of infrastructure. It's a story of remarkable infrastructure building. We built about 40 million houses, which is like building a complete Australia within India. That's more than the population of Australia, and we're building another 30 million houses. We provided toilets and sanitation to over 120 million Indians, which is more than the population of Germany. And we provided piped water connection to 253 million Indians, which is more than the population of Brazil. So the size and scale, and we built over 77,000 kilometers of roads and expressways. This is the size and scale of what India has done in terms of infrastructure building. And if you look at it, providing electricity connection to 30 million households, again, is the size and scale of what India has done is an enormous and an incredible story of infrastructure creation. And the fourth thing that's happened in India is the story of going green. Most of us do not realize this, but India has built over 230 gigawatt of non-fossil energy. No other country has been able to do it, and we brought down the price of renewable energy from 25 rupees to just 2 rupees. And now we are taking renewable energy to crack water and produce green hydrogen with the ambition of becoming the lowest cost producer of green hydrogen, the lowest manufacturer, the cheapest manufacturer of electrolyzer, and the lowest priced exporter of green hydrogen to the rest of the world, and pushing for green energy in a very big way. No other country has demonstrated the kind of ambition and energy of going green like India has done. And India has demonstrated that net zero can be net positive and that we can do a just and inclusive growth by still being very, very positive about going green. The fifth thing that India has done is to use, in many ways, new technology, the artificial intelligence mission, the quantum computing mission, the green hydrogen mission, the semiconductor mission. All of these will drive India's growth story in the coming years. But ladies and gentlemen, if India is to become a 30+ trillion economy, as I said, many other countries have done this. But all these countries did it at a point of time when there was a relative stability of the globalization process, when there was a relative era of peace. When Japan grew, when Korea grew, when China grew, the world trade was growing and expanding. When India has to grow, you're seeing a war in Europe for the last 4 years. You're seeing a huge crisis in the Middle East, and you're seeing China saying that we'll annex Taiwan even if it requires a war. And therefore, you're going to see massive global turmoil across the world. So globalization itself, the period of stability which had been seen since post-World War II itself, has come to an end. Second is that the global supply chains, the period of trade expanding, the period of global trade lifting people above the poverty line, that has ended. The global supply chains have been disrupted, and you're seeing huge tariffs being imposed against each other. And you're seeing tariffs being used as a mechanism for revenue generation. And therefore, what you are witnessing is that WTO is dead, that the distinction between developed, developing, and less developed countries has come to an end, and countries have started negotiating bilaterally. There'll be more bilateral trade, regional trade, etc. And the third is that we are seeing new productive forces of huge new productive forces of AI, quantum computing, robotics. All these will lead to a massive rise in production and productivity and transform lives of citizens. But the basic algorithms on which they are based would require some kind of an international consensus. Otherwise, they have the potential to trigger conflict among societies in due course. So these are the global challenges. India also has its own challenges. And India's own challenges are also critical for us to overcome. First and foremost, it's important to understand that India grew last year at 8.2%, this year it will grow at 7%. But India does this growth on just 50% of its population. The other 50% are very passive participants in the economy, with 46% people. Actually, the number of wage-level workers in the agriculture sector before COVID was 41%, which has gone up to 46% now. And then you have a number of people living in government subsidies, etc. So 50% of the population are not passive participants in India's economy. And the government's many schemes like Mudra, etc. are aiming to make them active participants in Indian economy. And that's very critical. Once they become very active players in Indian economy, Indian economy will grow on a sustained basis for a long period of time. The second challenge is that our manufacturing has to grow from 16% to 25%, and we need many more large companies which can manufacture. We have very few large companies. You need about 10,000, today you have 1,000 large companies, you need 10,000 large companies to grow, to bring the size and scale of manufacturing to penetrate global markets. Without exports, all these countries, whether Japan, Korea, China, all grew on the back of exports. And every time India has grown, it's grown on the back of exports. Without exports and penetrating global markets, it will not be possible for India to grow on a sustained basis for a long period of time. And therefore, you need large companies, you need the backward-forward linkages with MSMEs. When Maruti came in, it created its own back ecosystem of MSMEs, and therefore, without that, the MSME sector will not grow, and therefore, you need large companies, and you need to penetrate global markets. And lastly, it's very important that we focus very strongly on Human Development Index, the physical quality of life index, because no country in the world has been able to grow without improving learning outcomes, health outcomes, nutritional standards, and those are very, very critical. And the focus on Human Development Index is very critical and very important. Having given you what the global challenges are, and what the domestic challenges are, let me also tell you that all these countries which grew all had a very vibrant system of think tanks. I mean, look at it. There's only one country in the world today, which has a global share of 26%, which has a market cap of almost 48%, and with just 4% of the population. And that's the United States of America. That's close to 50% of the market cap, 26% of the global GDP, with 4% of the population. So actually, if there's one beneficiary of free trade in this world, it's the United States of America. Mr. Trump may say anything, but the beneficiary has been the United States of America. And therefore, but it's been possible because it had Brookings, it had Carnegie, it had Rand Corporation, it had Peterson Institute. All of them were constantly doing evidence-based research. All of them were feeding the government with outcomes. All of them were doing hard research on the basis of data and spelling out the big picture vision. And that is what is necessary to my mind. Despite all these challenges, I'm a great believer in India, and I really believe that not merely this decade, this century is India's. And this century is India's because we have a very young demographic. Our average age is 29, America is aging, Europe is aged, China is aging, but India is very young. Even when we become 100, our average age will still be just 35. And secondly, we are the only country in the world today which is making 8 airports and about 3 metro systems every year. We are the only country which is making 30 kilometers of roads and 12 kilometers of railway lines. We're the only country which has increased the solar energy by about 12x in the last 7 years. And we're the only country which, when it does technological disruption, it impacts the lives of citizens across the global south. But ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you this, that it would require very vibrant, dynamic think tanks to really constantly push innovation. It will require dynamic think tanks to constantly push sustainability, and it will require very dynamic think tanks to constantly get government officers out of their leftist mindset. Because my belief is that all of us have grown up with rules and regulation. The British Raj was replaced by licensed Raj, and all of us have grown it. It's become a part of our psyche. But India can't grow without free enterprise. Without free enterprise, it will be impossible for India to grow at 9 to 10%. And that would require a change of mindset. It would require a change of breaking down rules, regulation, procedures, acts that we've built over the years. Dismantle them in large scale. And it would require think tanks who have the vibrancy, dynamism, and who can think out of the box, who are not status quoists, and who are based on hard research, and who are dynamic enough to tell the government that you're going wrong here. And therefore, it's good to have think tanks who can also be critical of government once in a while. I'm quite sure the government will not mind it, even if you're critical in a constructive manner. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that this Chintan Research Foundation has a very critical, very important, and a very significant role to play. If India has to become a Viksit Bharat, if India has to become a $30+ trillion economy, if India has to raise its growth to 9% per annum year after year, it will require Chintan Research Foundation to become one of India's key foundations, a key think tank, and guide India towards this very dynamic roadmap for the future. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.